She said, "I'm not cutting off my ex just because you're insecure." "Fair point," I said. "Accepted." Throwaway account because this situation spiraled in ways I never expected, and honestly, I need some outside perspective on whether I handled this right. My name's Marcus. I'm a 32-year-old black man working in corporate finance. And this is the story of how my ex-girlfriend Vanessa basically orchestrated her own downfall while handing me the blueprint to a life I didn't even know I deserved. AITA for finally choosing myself after being her safety net for 4 years? Spoiler alert. I don't think I am, but the aftermath has been wild enough to make me question everything. Let me rewind to where this all started because the context matters more than you'd think. I met Vanessa about 4.5 years ago at a networking mixer in downtown Chicago, one of those awkward professional events where everyone's pretending the watered-down drinks make small talk easier. She was this ambitious HR consultant, full of energy about disrupting workplace culture and building her personal brand, and I was steadily climbing the ladder at a major investment firm. We connected over shared frustrations about corporate politics, laughed about the terrible hors d'oeuvres, stayed up until 3 a.m. that first night just talking about where we saw ourselves in 10 years. I fell for her completely, and at the time it seemed mutual. Early in our relationship, Vanessa told me about her ex, Deshaun. They'd been together for 3 years, met during her master's program, but it ended messy about 6 months before we met. According to her version, Deshaun was one of those creative types, always chasing the next big idea. Music production 1 month, cryptocurrency the next, never settling into anything stable. She described him as emotionally draining, someone who left her feeling financially and mentally exhausted. I was different, she said. Established, reliable, someone with a solid 401k and a 5-year plan. She told me that's exactly what she needed after the chaos Deshaun brought into her life. Looking back now, I realize how quickly I started making sacrifices without even recognizing the pattern. About 8 months into our relationship, Vanessa's consulting contract fell through when her main client's company got acquired and dissolved her entire division. She spiraled hard, anxiety attacks about her career trajectory, constant worry about her reputation in the industry. I stepped up without hesitation, covered her half of the rent for 4 months, helped her rebuild her portfolio, introduced her to contacts at firms I'd built relationships with over the years. She eventually landed a solid position at a mid-sized tech company doing culture consulting, and for a while, everything felt like we were building something real together. But that's exactly when Deshaun started creeping back into the picture like smoke under a door. At first, the contact seemed harmless enough, or at least that's how she framed it. A text message here, a comment on her Instagram there, just old friends checking in on each other's lives. I'd see his name flash across her screen during our Sunday morning routines, and she'd brush it off with an easy laugh. "Oh, Deshaun's just sending me some podcast he thinks I'd like," she'd say, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We ended things on good terms, you know how it is." "No big deal," she insisted, and I wanted to trust her, so I swallowed my discomfort. Then the interactions started escalating in frequency and intimacy in ways that made my gut twist. She began liking all his social media posts, pictures of him at recording studios with local artists, videos of him at underground showcases looking free and creative. Posts that screamed, "Look at this exciting, unstructured life I'm living." I'd mention it carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. "Hey babe, it's starting to bother me how much you're engaging with Deshaun's content." Her response always rolled in defensive with this edge that made me feel small. "Marcus, don't start with that insecure energy," she'd snap, waving her hand dismissively. "Deshaun and I have history, but that's ancient history now. We're just cool. That's what mature adults do." History. That word started echoing in my head during quiet moments, taking on weight I couldn't shake. I'd overhear fragments of their phone conversations when she thought I was in the shower or focused on work emails. Her voice would shift, become lighter, more animated as she laughed at his stories about studio drama or vented to him about workplace frustrations before even mentioning them to me. One evening, I came home early from the gym and found her scrolling through old photos on her laptop, images I'd never seen before. There was one of her and Deshaun at what looked like a rooftop party, his arm around her waist, both of them looking carefree and young in a way that stung. When I gently asked why she still kept those photos, why she'd never mentioned having them, she exploded. "Are you seriously policing my memories now?" She shot back, slamming the laptop shut. "Just because you're in my life now doesn't mean I have to erase everyone who came before. God, Marcus, why are you always so paranoid about everything?" I wasn't paranoid, though that word would become her favorite weapon against my legitimate concerns. I was committed, loyal, and yeah, maybe a little too willing to ignore red flags because I loved her vision of us. So I backed down, apologized for bringing it up, and tried harder to trust her despite every instinct screaming otherwise. Meanwhile, my own career trajectory was reaching a critical inflection point that would eventually change everything. About 2.5 years into our relationship, I received an offer from my firm's London office, a vice president position overseeing European market analysis with a significant salary increase and full relocation support. It was the kind of opportunity senior analysts dream about: leading a team, working on high-profile deals, experiencing life in one of the world's financial capitals. But Vanessa had just stabilized in her new role, finally building credibility after the contract disaster, and she completely shut down when I brought it up. "I can't just uproot my entire life right now, Marcus," she said, her voice tight with something that felt like anger. "What about my career that I just rebuilt? My family who's all here, my support system?" And then, almost as an afterthought that felt deliberate, "Plus Deshawn's going through some stuff with his mom's health, and I want to be around for that." Wait, hold up. Deshawn's personal family crisis was a factor in our life decisions? That's when alarm bells should have deafened me. But I was too deep in the sunken cost fallacy. I turned down the London position, telling myself it was a sacrifice for our future, for the relationship we were building together. She held me close that night, whispered all the right things about how much she appreciated my commitment to us. "You're my foundation, Marcus," she said against my chest, and I believed her. "I don't know what I'd do without your stability in my life." Those words felt like validation then, but they'd later reveal themselves as manipulation disguised as gratitude. 6 months passed, and the London office reached out again with an even better package, an expanded role with more autonomy. By this point, Vanessa had been promoted to senior consultant, was traveling quarterly for conferences, seemed professionally solid. But when I mentioned the renewed offer over dinner at our favorite Ethiopian spot, she hesitated in a way that felt rehearsed. "London sounds amazing for you, babe, but I'm finally in a good place here," she said, pushing injera around her plate. "And honestly, Deshawn just went through a bad breakup. He's really struggling mentally. I need to be present for my friends right now. You know?" Again, with Deshawn taking priority in decisions that should have been about us, about our future. I declined the second offer, watching my boss's disappointment through the video call as I explained my decision. "Marcus, man, I'm going to be real with you," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Opportunities like this don't circulate forever, especially for brothers trying to break into these upper positions. You're basically capping your ceiling here if you keep turning down advancement." His words haunted me, but I'd convinced myself that love required sacrifice, that Vanessa would do the same for me when the time came. I was wrong, painfully and expensively wrong. The third offer arrived last spring, almost exactly a year after the second rejection, and by then our relationship was fraying visibly. Vanessa's connection with Deshawn had evolved from occasional texts to regular hangouts that she'd mention casually in passing. "Oh, I grabbed coffee with Deshawn this afternoon. We talked about his new project," she'd say, like it was equivalent to meeting any other friend. Late-night texting sessions that she'd angle her phone away from when I entered the room, subtle comparisons that landed like paper cuts. "Deshawn's working on this community music initiative for kids. It's so inspiring," she'd say, then glance at me. "Your job's solid and everything, Marcus, but it's just so corporate, you know? Predictable." That word, predictable, started to replace stable in how she described me, and the shift in tone was devastating. When the third London email arrived, I brought it up during a weekend brunch I'd cooked, trying to create the perfect moment. "Vanessa, this could really be transformative for us," I said, showing her the offer details on my tablet. "Better quality of life, the chance to experience something new together, build something different." She barely looked at the screen before sighing, setting down her mimosa glass with a sound that felt final. I hear you, Marcus, but I'm genuinely happy with where my life is right now, she said flatly. And honestly, if you're pushing this London thing because you're threatened by my friendship with Deshawn, that's something you need to work on internally. The deflection was masterful, turning my legitimate career opportunity into evidence of my supposed emotional inadequacy. I tried a different approach, addressing the actual issue that had been building for months. Look, it's not just about London, I said carefully, measuring each word. It's about boundaries in our relationship. If we're serious about a future together, maybe we need to establish some distance between you and Deshawn. It's starting to feel like emotional infidelity. The way you prioritize his needs and confide in him before me. Her eyes went cold in a way I'd never seen before, and I knew immediately I'd crossed some invisible line she'd drawn. Emotional infidelity? She repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. Wow, Marcus, that's actually insane. I'm not cutting off my ex just because you're insecure about yourself. People can maintain healthy friendships with their exes. Grow the hell up and deal with your trust issues. That statement landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs as I sat there processing. I'd sacrificed 3 major career advancements, covered her financially during her lowest point, been her emotional support through every crisis. And now the issue was my insecurity, my inability to be mature about her maintaining intimate contact with an ex who clearly still had feelings for her. I stared at the eggs getting cold on my plate, feeling the weight of those 3 declined offers crushing down on my chest. But I didn't argue, didn't try to convince her or defend my perspective, because in that moment, something fundamental shifted in how I saw everything. Instead, I nodded slowly, my voice eerily calm even to my own ears. Fair point, I said, and I watched her blink in surprise at my easy agreement. You're absolutely right about setting your own boundaries. I excused myself from the table, walked into our bedroom, opened my laptop, and replied to the email right then. Accepted, I typed, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. I can start in 8 weeks. No fanfare, no discussion, no second-guessing, just a quiet decision to stop being her backup plan while she explored whatever she had going with Deshawn. The next several weeks played out like a slow-motion unraveling that I observed more than participated in. Vanessa continued her routine as if our brunch conversation had never happened, still texting Deshawn openly, posting cryptic Instagram stories about honoring authentic connections and not dimming your light for anyone's comfort. I kept my acceptance completely under wraps, methodically handling logistics, working with HR on my transition timeline, quietly researching neighborhoods in London, beginning to sort through our shared belongings mentally. Internally, I was a mess of conflicting emotions, replaying every sacrifice and every moment I'd sublimated my needs for hers. Why had I declined London 3 times for someone who saw my stability as boring rather than valuable? The confusion gnawed at me during solitary walks along the lakefront, watching the Chicago skyline reflect in the water while I questioned everything. Had I wasted nearly 5 years on someone who was just using me as a safety net while keeping Deshawn warm on the side? Was my need for basic relationship boundaries really just insecurity? Or was I justified in expecting prioritization from my partner? I didn't lash out or create drama, just quietly detached, emotionally protecting myself while I prepared for the geographic reset. It felt surreal, like watching myself in a movie where the protagonist finally stops being everyone's doormat and chooses himself for once. Things reached a breaking point about a month before my scheduled move date, during an evening that started normal and ended explosively. Vanessa had been spending increasing amounts of time out with friends, which I'd come to understand meant primarily with Deshawn, based on the background details I'd catch in her stories. I'd seen her posting from the same venues he was at, commenting heart emojis on his performance videos, engaging in a way that went beyond any reasonable definition of just friends. That particular night, she came home around midnight, slightly tipsy and riding some emotional high, and dropped onto our couch with a dramatic sigh. "We need to have a serious talk, Marcus," she announced, not even looking at me directly. I set down the book I'd been pretending to read, my heart rate somehow completely steady despite knowing what was coming. All right, I said evenly, sitting across from her in the chair I'd already mentally left behind. What's on your mind? She fidgeted with her phone, scrolling through something before setting it face down, and I could see her composing her thoughts into whatever narrative she'd constructed. This relationship isn't working anymore, she finally said, her voice taking on this rehearsed quality. You're suffocating me with all this jealousy and control around Deshawn. I need space to figure out what I actually want from my life without constantly managing your insecurities. I should have felt devastated, but instead, I felt something closer to relief mixed with vindication. Space, I repeated, letting the word hang there. To figure out what you want, meaning to explore things with Deshawn without the guilt? She had the audacity to roll her eyes, that condescending expression I'd come to recognize whenever I challenged her narrative. See, there it is again, jealous Marcus making everything about Deshawn, she said with exasperation. He gets me on a level you don't, Marcus. He's creative, spontaneous. We connect about art and culture and real meaningful stuff beyond just financial planning and career ladders. You're always so safe, so predictable, turning down adventures like that London position because you're scared of actual change and growth. The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud, but I maintained my composure, just observing her rewrite history in real time. I turned down London for her, explicitly because she'd asked me to stay, but now it was evidence of my fear rather than my sacrifice. I turned down London for you, Vanessa, I said quietly, more for the record than expecting acknowledgement. 3 separate times, specifically because you asked me to stay. She waved her hand dismissively, like swatting away an inconvenient fact that didn't fit her narrative. Whatever your reasons, the point is I deserve a partner who matches my energy and evolution, she continued, her voice gaining confidence. Deshawn isn't perfect, obviously, but at least he doesn't try to clip my wings or control who I spend time with. I'm not saying I'm running straight into his arms, but yeah, we've been connecting more deeply lately, and you constantly making it an issue is exactly the problem. Her words were surgical in their cruelty, weaponizing my legitimate concerns as character flaws while justifying her emotional affair. So you're choosing your relationship with him over our relationship, I said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. God, why does it have to be this binary choice? She shot back, her frustration seeming genuine in her delusion. But yes, if you're going to force me to choose between maintaining a meaningful friendship and dealing with your constant suspicion, then yes, Marcus. I'm not cutting him off just because you feel threatened by a connection you don't understand. That's manipulative, and if you actually loved me and trusted me, this wouldn't even be a conversation we're having. Manipulative. Coming from the woman who'd gaslit me for months while cultivating an inappropriate relationship behind the veneer of friendship. She leaned back against the couch cushions, arms crossed defensively, looking so certain of her moral high ground. I think we should take a break, probably permanent, she declared, like she was handing down a verdict. I'll stay at my sister's place tonight, give you some time and space to think about how your controlling behavior contributed to this breakdown. Even in ending it, she was positioning herself as the victim and me as the villain, but I was so far past caring about her narrative. I didn't beg, didn't raise my voice, didn't give her the dramatic scene she seemed to expect or maybe wanted. Just looked at her steadily, this woman I'd loved and sacrificed for, now a stranger in our shared space. Fair point, I said for the second time in a month, my tone neutral and detached. If that's what you need, go ahead. She actually blinked in surprise, her expression shifting to confusion like she'd expected resistance or pleading. Wait, that's it? She asked, sitting forward slightly. No, please don't go, or let's work on this. You're just okay with me leaving. I shrugged, genuinely empty of emotional investment in her decision at this point. What do you want me to say, Vanessa? I asked calmly. You've clearly made your choice. You've been making it for months now. You want freedom to pursue whatever this thing with Deshawn is without me being an obstacle. I'm just acknowledging the reality you've already created. She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps realizing she'd lost the control she thought she had, then huffed and grabbed her overnight bag from the hall closet. Fine, whatever, she muttered, shoving her laptop and some clothes into it, You'll regret this when you realize nobody else is going to put up with your boring, corporate robot routine and trust issues. And with that parting shot, she walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames we'd hung together during happier times. Alone in the apartment, the silence felt both heavy and liberating, like the pressure change after a storm passes. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat on the balcony overlooking the Chicago streets below, and let the unfairness of it all wash over me in waves. For years of unwavering loyalty, dismissed as controlling behavior. 3 career-defining opportunities sacrificed, reframed as my fear of change. Financial and emotional support through her hardest times, forgotten in her revisionist narrative where I was the obstacle to her happiness. Part of me wanted to call her, explain about London being accepted, make her understand exactly what she'd lost and what I'd already moved past. But no, that would be seeking validation from someone who'd proven incapable of valuing me correctly, and I was done with that dynamic. Instead, I texted my future team lead in London, all set on this end, counting down to the move. Then I blocked Vanessa's number, not out of spite or punishment, but out of simple self-preservation and the need for clean boundaries. The next morning, I contacted my landlord about breaking the lease early, started boxing up my belongings in earnest, and began saying quiet goodbyes to the friends who actually mattered. No dramatic social media announcements, no vague posting about betrayal, just forward motion toward the life I should have chosen months ago. But the emotional aftermath wasn't clean or simple, despite my outward calm and decisive actions. Nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling while my mind replayed her justifications, dissecting every conversation for signs I'd missed or boundaries I'd failed to set. How had her platonic friendship evolved into her literally choosing him over our relationship without me seeing it coming? Was I genuinely the insecure, controlling partner she'd painted me as? Or had she been systematically manipulating my perception to justify her emotional infidelity? The questions circled like vultures, picking at my confidence even as I packed boxes and finalized logistics. It felt profoundly outrageous and deeply undeserved after everything I'd invested in us. In her, in the future I'd thought we were building. I'd been loyal to a fault, supportive beyond what was probably healthy, present through every crisis while sublimating my own needs and opportunities. And my reward was being gaslit, replaced, and blamed for the deterioration of a relationship she'd been sabotaging for over a year. I started journaling to process it, pages and pages of angry, confused, hurt writing that helped externalize the chaos. I also reached out to my older brother, a therapist, for some anonymous perspective without all the messy details. Man, that's textbook emotional abandonment and narrative manipulation, he said over our phone call, his professional tone mixing with brotherly protectiveness. She created conditions where your reasonable needs became unreasonable demands. That's a classic move. You're not crazy for wanting basic respect and boundaries in your relationship. His validation helped, confirming that my reality hadn't been distorted by insecurity but by her deliberate reframing of normal expectations. Still, the pain was real and present, a constant ache beneath the practical tasks of relocating continents. I didn't try to rush past it or pretend I was unaffected, just let it breathe and exist while I kept moving forward. London loomed on the horizon like a beacon, a tangible representation of choosing myself after years of choosing her. A chance to rebuild my identity outside of being Vanessa's supportive but boring boyfriend, to discover who Marcus was when he stopped shrinking himself to accommodate someone else's chaos. I didn't just disappear overnight, though. Despite the finality of our break, the logistics of an international move required time and methodical planning. With departure 3 weeks away, I focused intensely on tying up professional loose ends, transitioning my active deals to colleagues, documenting processes for my replacement. I also ramped up my gym routine, finding that the physical exhaustion helped quiet the mental noise, clearing space for the emotional shift happening beneath the surface. Internally, the transformation was happening in stages, from vulnerable and questioning everything, to angry and betrayed, to finally reaching a quiet resolve. This is my life, I tell my reflection while shaving each morning, not hers to dictate or diminish anymore. The apartment gradually emptied as I shipped essentials ahead, sold furniture I wouldn't need, donated the accumulated stuff of a relationship that had run its course. Each box packed felt like shedding weight, physical and emotional, making room for whatever came next. Vanessa tried reaching out after about a week of silence, probably expecting that I'd have cooled down enough to engage. A text from an unknown number since I'd blocked her main line. "Marcus, it's V. Can we please talk like adults?" My phone died using my girl Ashley's. I didn't mean for things to end with so much hostility and misunderstanding. I stared at the message for a full minute, then deleted it without responding, the first time in our entire relationship I'd left her on read. Then came an email to my work address, which I'd forgotten to block. "Marcus, seriously, you're being incredibly childish and petty. Let's meet for coffee and sort this out maturely. We were together too long to end like this." Still nothing from me. Radio silence that apparently drove her crazy given what came next. Word started circulating through our mutual friend group, and messages trickled in with updates I hadn't asked for. "Yo, Marcus, Vanessa's telling people you completely overreacted about her friendship with Deshaun." My boy Travis texted. "Says you ghosted her out of pure spite and she's the victim here. Thought you should know." I kept my responses brief and neutral, refusing to engage in he said she said drama. "We wanted different things, incompatible visions for the relationship," I'd reply. "I wish her well, no hard feelings. No bad-mouthing, no detailed explanations, no mention of the London move that was still my private business." The day before my flight, I handed off the apartment keys to the landlord, having paid the early termination fee without blinking. "Good luck with the next tenant," I said, taking one last look at the space that had held so much of my life. That night I stayed at an airport hotel, my entire existence condensed into 3 suitcases and 2 carry-ons, feeling simultaneously unmoored and more free than I'd felt in years. For the first time since meeting Vanessa, I wasn't planning around someone else's needs or limitations, wasn't calculating how my choices would affect her fragile sense of security. Landing at Heathrow felt surreal, like stepping into an alternate timeline where I'd made different choices years earlier. The London office welcomed me with genuine warmth, team dinners at pubs in the city, practical advice about neighborhoods and navigating the tube, excitement about the projects we'd be tackling. The work itself was challenging in the best way possible, complex deals requiring the kind of strategic thinking I'd been underutilizing in my previous role. I found a flat in Canary Wharf with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames, started exploring the borough markets on weekends, even joined a pickup basketball league with other American expats. The confusion and hurt gradually faded into clarity and gratitude as weeks turned into months in my new life. I'd been holding myself back, dimming my ambitions and opportunities, all for someone who'd seen my sacrifices as obligations rather than love. Now I was free from that dynamic, free to be ambitious without guilt, to prioritize myself without being called selfish. Friends back home kept me loosely updated on the Chicago social scene, though I never asked specifically about Vanessa or sought out information. Emily from the old group said Vanessa and Deshaun are pretty much official now, my friend Jordan mentioned during a video call about 2 months into my London stint. Lots of couple photos on the gram, them at shows and art events, looking all loved up. I was sitting in a cafe in Shoreditch when I got that update, sipping an Americano and watching the East London creative types drift past. "Good for them," I said, and meant it genuinely at first, hoping she'd found whatever she thought was missing with me. But as I settled into my new reality, my internal voice grew stronger and clearer. No more what-ifs or second-guessing, just appreciation for the push I'd needed to bet on myself. That's when karma started making its presence known, slow at first, then accelerating like compound interest. I didn't seek out updates or stalk social media profiles. I'd actually unfollowed most of the Chicago crew to create distance. But information trickled through well-meaning friends who felt weird keeping me in the dark about the spectacular unraveling happening back home. About 10 weeks into my London life, Travis messaged with a lengthy update he prefaced with, "Man, I know you've moved on, but thought you should know this situation is imploding spectacularly." Apparently, the shine wore off Vanessa and Deshaun's reunion faster than a cheap paint job, revealing all the structural problems underneath. From the details Travis shared, Deshaun's creative spontaneity, that Vanessa had found so inspiring came with significant baggage she'd either forgotten or romanticized away. He was apparently drowning in debt, credit cards maxed from studio time and equipment he couldn't really afford, gig income that barely covered his rent. No steady employment beyond sporadic session work and the occasional showcase that paid in exposure rather than actual money. Vanessa, riding the high of her newfound freedom and authentic connection, had made an impulsive decision that would prove catastrophic. She quit her stable consulting position, the job I'd helped her network into, to pursue a more creative path alongside Deshawn. The plan, according to mutual friends, was to combine her HR expertise with his music connections to create some kind of artist development consulting hybrid. They'd build a brand together, document the journey on social media, live authentically outside the corporate machine she'd come to resent. It was the kind of half-baked plan that sounds revolutionary at 2 a.m. after wine but crumbles under the slightest practical scrutiny. She was funding most of this dream with the savings I'd helped her build during our relationship, the emergency fund I'd encouraged her to maintain. They lasted about 3 months in this bohemian fantasy before reality came crashing in with bills and responsibilities. Her LinkedIn went quiet, no new position announcements or project updates, while her Instagram shifted to vague posts about entrepreneurship being a journey. Friends in the Chicago scene started distancing themselves, especially after Vanessa apparently spent several social gatherings trash-talking me to anyone who'd listen. Marcus was just so safe and boring, couldn't handle my growth, she'd say, according to multiple sources. Deshawn gets my creative soul in a way Marcus's corporate robot brain never could. The irony of her corporate career success, which I directly facilitated, being dismissed while she struggled wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. Then the real cracks started showing in ways that friends felt compelled to share with me. Deshawn's romantic spontaneity apparently extended to his attention span with women, and he hadn't exactly reformed just because Vanessa left a stable relationship for him. Dude, this is messy, but Ashley was at this showcase and saw Deshawn openly flirting with some singer, like right in front of Vanessa, Travis reported. When she called him on it later, he apparently said something about not believing in possessive relationship structures. Sound familiar? Arguments about money became constant, with Vanessa increasingly footing bills while Deshawn talked about investments in his craft and long-term vision. The breaking point came during some music festival weekend they'd road tripped to, about 4 months into their official relationship. Multiple sources confirmed that Deshawn had a full-blown affair with another woman at the festival, didn't even hide it particularly well, and when Vanessa confronted him, he bailed. Just literally left her at some campground 2 states away, stuck with the hotel bill and no ride back. He texted her some nonsense about needing space and not being ready for commitment, my friend Ashley told me during a catch-up call. Classic Deshawn move. Apparently he's done this before. Vanessa had to borrow money from her sister to get home, completely humiliated. She came back to Chicago broken in multiple ways. Emotionally devastated, financially depleted, professionally adrift. The savings were largely gone, drained into Deshawn's various projects and their unsustainable lifestyle. Her professional network, which I'd helped her cultivate, had moved on, and her abrupt resignation had burned bridges at her former company. She was applying desperately for positions but getting rejected, the unexplained gap and impulsive quit raising red flags for hiring managers. Her social media transformed from smug couple content to pseudo-inspirational posts about growth through adversity and trusting the journey. When the universe removes people from your life, it's making room for your blessings. One post read, and I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The isolation intensified as even her closest friends started seeing through the narrative she'd constructed. Ashley, who'd known Vanessa longer than I had, admitted the friend group had collectively realized she'd treated me terribly. "We all see it now, Marcus," she said apologetically. "How she emotionally checked out on you while keeping you as security, then blamed you for reasonable boundaries. She made her bed spectacularly." Professionally, the spiral continued as months passed without solid employment, just occasional freelance gigs that barely covered expenses. Word in the industry, according to a former colleague, was that her departure had been viewed as erratic and her subsequent ventures as unfocused. One update hit with particular schadenfreude, though I tried not to take pleasure in her pain. A mutual connection mentioned my London success in a group chat Vanessa was apparently still part of, someone casually bringing up how I was thriving abroad. Oh yeah, Marcus got promoted again, he's like VP level now, traveling all over Europe, they'd said innocently. Saw his Instagram. Looks like he's living his best life. Vanessa's response, according to screenshots I was sent, was immediate unfollowing and blocking of anyone who mentioned me positively. Radio silence, then a mass culling of her social media to remove any trace of our relationship or connections to my circle. Sitting in my London flat, hosting a dinner party for colleagues who'd become genuine friends, I felt the cosmic justice of it. Her downfall wasn't some dramatic public spectacle. It was realistic and earned through her own choices. Broke, single, professionally struggling, socially isolated from people who'd seen her true character. Meanwhile, I was genuinely thriving. Another promotion already in discussion, weekend trips to Paris and Barcelona, even casually dating a British woman I'd met through the basketball league. Nothing serious yet, but the possibility felt exciting rather than threatening, refreshing after years of walking on eggshells. Karma hadn't just caught up with Vanessa, it had highlighted the trajectory divergence between someone who'd discarded a good thing for a fantasy versus someone who'd finally chosen himself. She treated me like a safety net she could discard once something more exciting came along, only to discover that exciting often means unstable, and stability actually had value she'd taken for granted. Her attempts to reconcile, which started subtle and escalated to desperate, became the final proof of the reversal. The first reconciliation attempt came about 4 months into my London life, carefully crafted and sent to my work email. Marcus, hey, I heard through people that you're in London now. That's amazing. Really happy for your success. It began, dripping with false casualness. Look, I know things ended badly between us, and I take responsibility for my part in that. Deshaun turned out to be not who I thought he was. Really toxic, actually. I miss having you to talk to, you always gave such good advice. Could we maybe catch up? Just as friends? I read it during my lunch break, sitting in a park near the office, pigeons pecking around my feet. No sympathy stirred, no temptation to engage, just a distant recognition of the manipulation. She'd called me boring and predictable, chosen emotional chaos over stability, blamed me for her choices. Now she wanted access to the stability she'd rejected, reframed as friendship. I archived the email without responding the way you'd file away junk mail. Next came texts from various unknown numbers, clearly her using different phones or apps to bypass the block. Marcus, please don't ignore me. I really messed up and I see that now. One read. Deshaun was actually abusive and controlling, isolated me from everyone. Isn't it ironic, considering what you accused me of? That was projection on my part. I see that in therapy now. The audacity to rewrite her willing choices as victimhood, to compare my requests for basic boundaries to actual abuse. The messages escalated in frequency and emotional manipulation over the following weeks. Why are you being so cold and cruel? One voicemail asked, her voice breaking convincingly. I thought you were better than this, more forgiving. I'm in a really dark place right now, Marcus, financially and emotionally. My family's worried about me. At least respond so I know you don't completely hate me. The family mention was strategic, I recognized, meant to trigger my protective instincts. But I'd learned that her emergencies weren't my responsibility, especially after she'd made it clear I was the problem. Then her support system got involved, starting with her younger sister Kennedy, who'd never liked me anyway. An Instagram DM appeared despite us not following each other. You're really a piece of work, Marcus? You know that? Vanessa's literally falling apart because of how you abandoned her, and you're over there living it up like you don't care. She made one mistake with Deshaun and you just cut her off like she's nothing? Be a man and give her closure at least. I blocked Kennedy immediately, refusing to engage with the toxic enabling that had probably contributed to Vanessa's issues. Then came a call from Vanessa's mother, Mrs. Patterson, who'd always been kind to me during our relationship. Marcus, sweetheart, I know my daughter hurt you, and I'm not excusing that, she began, her voice heavy with parental concern. But she's really struggling, lost her job, burned through her savings. barely leaving her apartment. You were always so good to her, so stable and forgiving. Could you find it in your heart to at least talk to her, help her find some direction? For old time's sake. The guilt trip was expertly delivered, appealing to my history of being the helper, the stabilizer. But I'd left that role behind when I boarded the plane to Heathrow. I'm sorry she's struggling, Mrs. Patterson. I really am, I said honestly. But I'm not the person who can help her anymore. That dynamic wasn't healthy for either of us. She needs to figure this out on her own. After I maintained my boundaries with her family, Vanessa's tone shifted from apologetic to angry, the mask slipping completely. Another voicemail, this time with her real feelings. Fine, Marcus. Ignore me then. Be that petty. I see you now for who you really are. You're actually loving this, aren't you? Me struggling while you're off playing successful expat. Deshawn was right about you. You're emotionally unavailable and vindictive as hell. How dare you just cut me off after everything we went through together? The hypocrisy was breathtaking, accusing me of exactly what she'd done. But it confirmed I'd made the right choice in maintaining no contact. She even tried enlisting mutual friends as intermediaries, putting them in uncomfortable positions. Man, Vanessa's blowing up my phone asking me to reach you, Jordan told me, frustration evident. Says you owe her an explanation for just disappearing, that it's cruel to ghost someone after a 4-year relationship. Her sister's calling you all kinds of names on social media. Not by name, but everyone knows. This is getting really messy and uncomfortable. Through all of it, I stayed firmly detached and boundaried. I'm sorry she's put you in the middle, I tell friends. But her situation isn't my responsibility, and engaging would just open a door I've closed for good reason. The desperate financial angle emerged in later messages, the vulnerability clearly calculated. Marcus, I really need help, like actually urgent. A text read about 6 months into my London life. I'm about to lose my apartment. I'm in serious debt from the Deshawn situation. Remember when you covered my rent when I lost that contract? I'm not asking for money, just, okay, maybe temporarily some help. You were always so generous. The entitlement was staggering, expecting me to rescue her from consequences of choices she'd made while disparaging me. Power reversal complete. The woman who'd smugly walked out to pursue excitement now powerless, grasping at the stability she'd rejected. The final confrontation came at the most unexpected moment. During a trip back to the States I'd planned around a friend's wedding. My boy Marcus from college was getting married in Michigan, and I'd flown in for the weekend, my first time stateside in nearly 8 months. I kept the visit low-key, didn't broadcast it on social media, just quietly reconnected with close friends. The wedding was at a beautiful vineyard venue outside Detroit, fall colors everywhere, that perfect crisp weather. I showed up looking good, tailored suit, London polish evident, carrying stories of European adventures and professional wins. That's when I saw her across the cocktail lawn during the reception hour, and my stomach dropped. Vanessa, looking rough in a way that shocked me, dark circles under eyes that had lost their spark, wearing a dress that hung wrong like she'd lost weight. Our mutual friend, the groom, must have invited her without thinking about the awkwardness, or maybe hoping for some closure. She spotted me almost immediately, and I watched her face cycle through emotions. Shock, hurt, anger, something that looked like hunger. Before I could strategically relocate, she was walking toward me with determined purpose. Marcus, she said, her voice shaky but insistent, like she'd rehearsed this moment. Oh my God, you're here, you look really good, successful. I heard you're killing it in London. I sipped my champagne, keeping my expression neutral and polite but not warm. Vanessa, hey? I said simply. Yeah, London's been great. Good to see you. I tried to move toward a group of friends, but she stepped into my path, desperation breaking through her attempt at casualness. Wait, please, we need to talk, she said, glancing around like she was worried about witnesses to her vulnerability. I flew back early from, well, I wasn't going to come, but I heard you might be here. I really think we need to clear the air, get some closure. The manipulation was obvious, the manufactured encounter, the appeal to closure as if she was owed my emotional labor. I set my glass on a passing waiter's tray, buying a moment to choose my words carefully. Vanessa, this isn't the place for that conversation, I said firmly but quietly. This is about celebrating our friends, not rehashing our past. Her eyes filled with tears that I suspected were both genuine and strategic, her voice dropping to a pleading whisper. Please, Marcus, just 5 minutes, she begged, touching my arm in a familiar way that now felt invasive. I was so wrong about everything. About Deshawn. About us. About what I threw away. She launched into her prepared speech without waiting for my consent, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them for months. Deshawn was a complete disaster. He cheated on me, drained my savings, left me stranded and broke, she said, her voice cracking. Everything fell apart after we split. My job, my friendships, my whole life basically. I see now that you were my foundation, the stability I needed but didn't appreciate because I was chasing some fantasy. I threw away something real because I was stupid and selfish, and I'm asking for another chance. Come back to Chicago, or let me come to London, we can start fresh, rebuild what we had. The hypocrisy and entitlement were breathtaking. Now she wanted the safe, predictable life she'd mocked me for offering. I took a step back, physically and emotionally, my voice steady and detached like I was closing a business deal. I hear what you're saying, and I'm sorry you went through difficult times, I said, my tone professional rather than personal. But that chapter of my life is completely closed, filed away in the archives. I've built something new in London, new career trajectory, new social circles, new perspective on what I want and deserve. You're not part of that equation anymore, and honestly, you haven't been for a long time. She stared at me like I'd slapped her, tears spilling over as the reality penetrated. That's it? She asked, her voice rising slightly. After everything, for years together, you're just done. Like I mean nothing? I kept my voice low but firm, aware of guests starting to glance our way. After everything, yes, I'm done, I confirmed. You made your choice when you prioritized Deshawn over basic relationship respect and boundaries. You called me insecure for asking to be valued, boring for being stable, predictable for sacrificing opportunities to support your goals. I accepted your assessment and moved on accordingly. Her anger flashed through the hurt, the entitlement showing itself. I begged, Marcus, I admitted I was wrong, she said, her voice sharp now. My whole family thinks you're being cruel. My sister says you're punishing me for one mistake. The mention of her family's opinions, like that should matter to me, was almost funny. Tell Kennedy and your mom I said hello, but their opinions aren't relevant to my life decisions anymore, I said evenly. And it wasn't one mistake, Vanessa. It was a pattern of choices that showed me who you were and what you valued. I'm not punishing you. I'm just not rescuing you from the consequences of your own actions. There's a difference. She stood there, mascara running slightly, realizing the power dynamic had completely inverted. Me thriving and boundaried, her desperate and powerless. Guests were definitely watching now, whispers spreading about the drama unfolding on the lawn. You'll regret this, she said, her final attempt at maintaining some dignity or power. When you're alone in some foreign city and realize what you gave up. I smiled slightly, not unkindly but with complete certainty. I'm not alone, Vanessa. I'm actually more connected and alive than I've been in years, I replied. What I gave up was being undervalued and manipulated, and I don't regret that for a second. You should focus on rebuilding your own life instead of trying to reclaim access to mine. With that, I walked away, rejoining my friends near the bar, leaving her standing there processing the finality. The rest of the wedding, I was lighter, laughing genuinely, toasting the happy couple, dancing without the weight I'd carried for years. Vanessa left early, I noticed, slipping out before dinner, her presence a footnote rather than a disruption. Flying back to London the next day, watching the Atlantic pass beneath the plane, I felt the story close completely. No guilt, no second-guessing, no wondering if I should have been more compassionate. I'd done the work to heal, to rebuild, to become someone who valued himself enough to maintain boundaries. Back in my Canary Wharf flat, life hummed forward with momentum and purpose that still sometimes surprised me. The promotion came through officially VP of European Market Strategy, a title that would have seemed impossible when I was diminishing myself for Vanessa's comfort. Weekend trips became routine: Amsterdam, Barcelona, Edinburgh, exploring the continent I'd almost missed entirely. The dating situation evolved naturally too. Sarah, the woman from the basketball league, became something more serious, though I was taking it slow, learning to trust again while maintaining the self-prioritization I discovered. Professionally, I was crushing it, leading a team of analysts, presenting to C-suite executives, building a reputation as someone who delivered results. Personally, I was growing in ways that had been stunted, taking art classes, joining a book club, even starting to write about finance and career development. Friends from Chicago who visited were shocked by the transformation, not just the external success but the internal peace. "Man, you seem like a completely different person," Jordan said during his London visit. "More confident, more yourself, like you grew into who you were supposed to be all along." The karma wasn't something I'd orchestrated or even wished for, despite the hurt Vanessa had caused. It was simply the natural consequence of her choices meeting reality, while my choices to value myself created positive momentum. She'd bet on excitement over stability, fantasy over reality, and lost spectacularly. I'd bet on myself, on my worth, on the future I deserved, and won in ways I couldn't have imagined sitting in that Chicago apartment feeling suffocated. Sometimes, late at night with the Thames glittering below my windows, I'd reflect on the whole arc with something approaching gratitude. Vanessa had done me a favor, really, by showing her true colors clearly enough that I couldn't ignore them anymore. If she'd been subtler, if I'd been weaker, I might still be in Chicago, slowly dying inside while she cultivated her emotional affair, turning down opportunities, shrinking myself. Instead, her blatant disrespect and entitled dismissal of my needs had been the catalyst I'd needed to finally choose myself. I never responded to any of her subsequent attempts at contact, which tapered off over the following year to occasional drunk texts I'd delete unread. Mutual friends reported she eventually moved back in with her parents, took a job well below her qualifications, seemed diminished in ways that went beyond circumstances. I felt neither satisfaction nor guilt about that, just a distant acknowledgement that people's choices shape their lives. My own life continued expanding, new cities explored, new professional challenges conquered, new relationship deepening with someone who valued stability and ambition rather than resenting them. The story could have ended in bitterness or regret, with me stuck in resentment about the time I'd wasted or her trapped in victim mentality about the stability she'd lost. Instead, it ended with clarity and growth, at least on my side. I'd learned my worth, learned to recognize manipulation disguised as love, learned that sacrifice without reciprocity isn't noble but self-destructive. Vanessa had presumably learned her own lessons, though what those were wasn't my concern anymore. Looking back now, from the vantage point of a life I'd built entirely on my own terms, I could see the whole relationship clearly. The red flags I'd ignored, the sacrifices I'd made that were never going to be reciprocated, the slow erosion of my sense of self under her constant criticism disguised as honesty. I could also see the gift hidden in the betrayal, the push I'd needed to stop living for someone else's approval and start living for my own fulfillment. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, clearing space for what you actually deserve. "So yeah," she'd said, "I'm not cutting off my ex just because you're insecure." And I'd said, "Fair point," and accepted the London position, the end of the relationship, the invitation to finally put myself first. She'd thought she was calling my bluff, asserting her independence, keeping her options open. Instead, she'd freed me from a cage I hadn't fully recognized I was in, handed me the keys to a life I'd been too afraid or too loyal to claim on my own. For that, despite everything, I was genuinely grateful. The reversal was complete, cosmic, and entirely of her own making. She'd wanted excitement and got chaos. She'd wanted freedom and got isolation. She'd wanted to escape boring predictability and ended up desperate for the stability she'd mocked. Meanwhile, I'd found actual excitement in choosing my own path, genuine freedom in setting boundaries, and a predictable foundation that allowed for real growth and adventure. Karma didn't need my help or my vindication. It just needed time to do its work.